Hi everybody, my name is Kate and welcome to this video with exam revision. So today what we're going to do is we're going to go through a few exam tips and advice for people sitting their junior cert higher level maths exam this year. Okay, so we're going to start with just a quick run through the exam. So you'll have 2 hours to complete the exam and you must answer all questions. Okay, so even if you're unsure of a question, it is always better to attempt it because you'll never know what kind of attempt marks you'll pick up. The recommended time or the suggested time is written at the top of each question, and the main advice here is not to go over this. So when you start a question, you should take a quick look at the clock, and if the suggested time is 5 minutes, spend your 5 minutes at it. If you finish early, great, move on to the next question. If you are still working after the 5 minutes, you should really move on to the next question. And then if you have extra time at the end, come back. What you will find is some questions, they may take you shorter than the suggested time. So then that will leave you extra time then at the end to come back and finish any bits you ran out of time for. Okay. What you don't want happening is that you get to the end of the paper and you're doing a question that you are quite confident with and then you run out of time. Okay. So by sticking to the suggested time, this won't happen. Okay, I'm also suggesting to spend a few minutes at the start of the paper to look through the topics, look through the questions, and to start with your favourite. Okay, especially with maths, it's nice to get a little confidence boost at the start. So if there's a topic you're really good at, I'm going to have a topic that I'm suggesting that you're going to start with later on in the video. But whatever topic you really like, start with this. And then you know you have a couple of marks in the bag before you go on to maybe some of the topics you don't like as much. Now, so the list of topics or your kind of checklist for the exam. So if you want to pause the video and screenshot, maybe you could use this then when you're studying, tick off the topics as you go along. So sets, so we all know what sets are, you need to know all your symbols, etc. Number systems, so this is all about what natural numbers are, integers, real numbers, etc. Sometimes people dismiss this as an easy topic, but it is really important, and what you'll find is it actually comes up in other sections as well. Then we have probability, statistics, make sure you practice drawing your graphs. Algebra then is a big one, we'll be talking more about that later. Indices, patterns, applied arithmetic or financial maths, applied measure, which I also call area and volume. We're going to see where those formulas are in your formula book later on. Distance, speed, time, so there's lots of graphs in that one, as well as functions. And then we have geometry, constructions, coordinate geometry and trigonometry. Okay, so they're the list of topics. For maths, all these topics intertwine. We'll have a look at ones that intertwine maybe more than others, but it is not possible to leave out any topic really, okay? Because how the questions are phrased and how the questions are formed, every part might link in with a new topic, okay? Or there might be one question that uses algebra and patterns together, for example, or distance, speed, time and functions. Okay, so it's not possible to kind of leave out a topic because then you may have to leave out a question. Okay, now the good news is there is lots of overlap between these topics. So that last list might look a little overwhelming, but if we look at it here, so simultaneous equations, for example, so everyone knows them from algebra. They can come up in coordinate geometry and in patterns as well. So for coordinate geometry, anytime you see point of intersection, all that is, it's another way of saying do simultaneous equations. Okay. Scientific notation, then that can come up in any area, same as rounding and significant figures. Okay, so that can come up, for example, in an area and volume question, and it might say give the volume correct to 2 decimal places. Okay, really important, after you do a question, make sure you read the question, and if it says to round or leave in third form or whatever it says, to make sure you just have that done at the end, because they are valuable marks, and it's really annoying if you've done all the hard work to get your final answer and then you just forget to round or round incorrectly. Okay, another thing that comes up all over the place is plotting points. So it can come up in functions, coordinate geometry, can come up in statistics as well. Just make sure they're nice and accurate. And the minus b formula as well comes up in patterns, it comes up in functions, and of course it comes up in normal algebra as well. Okay, so they are kind of basic skills that I would have, and then they're transferred through all the topics. Okay, so it will cut down on your learning, and hopefully by the time you kind of have the whole course covered, you will start to see the connections between the topics, and then that'll make your studying a lot easier. Okay, now what we're going to start with, and we're just going to look at this, it's going to be my favourite question. I think it's the most predictable and a nice questions to start with. So what I was saying earlier with the kind of general exam, first thing, I would open the paper, I'd have a quick flick through it, and if you are strong at algebra, which I would hope a lot of people are, and that you'd be spending a lot of time at kind of perfecting it if you're not strong at it, I would go start and find your algebra question. Okay, so for example, in the 2022 paper, obviously algebra is scattered throughout the paper. Nearly every question will have a little bit of algebra, even though you may not recognise it as algebra. Algebra is everywhere. Okay, but the 2022 paper, it had a question that was just direct algebra. So it had subbing in numbers to find values, had a bit of factorising, a few algebraic fractions, and then the minus b formula as part D. Okay, they are all skills from algebra that you can practice and you can really perfect. Now, just to show how predictable this question is, we're going to have a look at some of the mock questions that came up this year. So the algebra mock question that was in one paper, again, we have factorising as our part A. We have multiplying out as our part B, and then part C, although it may not look like it, when you do part B, you'll realise that that's the minus B formula. Okay, another mock paper, so these are not from the same paper, so this is one algebra question on mock 1 here, from a different mock 2, I've called it. This is another algebra question, so again, we've factorising, we've an inequality, and we've an algebraic fraction. Okay, and then from another mock, separate mock again, we have a full algebra question, an inequality, factorising, long division, and minus B formula. Okay, so I think those algebra questions, if you are confident with your algebra, and if you are not confident with your algebra at this stage of the year, I would really recommend spending lots of time on it. Okay, we have videos on YouTube that will help you kind of perfect that algebra, but it's really, really important, and then it is nearly a guaranteed question. There will be algebra somewhere on your paper, and it is a nice question to pick up your marks in because you're able to practice it. Okay, so for example, if factorising comes up, there's not much they can do with it to overcomplicate it. Okay, you have your 4 types of factorising, you know it's going to be one of those 4 types. Okay, so there's going to be algebra somewhere on your paper. I'd have a quick flick through. If there's a full question on it that looks nice, I would start with that. Should give you a bit of a confidence boost if you have put your work into algebra. Okay, now moving on to using your formula book. So a lot of people struggle with this because at junior cert sometimes you just use the formulas from the book, like your textbook, but they're written out slightly different in your formula book, and also the book can just be a little bit overwhelming because there's so many things in it. So we're just going to have a look at where things are. So when you open your formula book, you'll have your page of contents, so you have all the different topics in it. Now we actually use very few of these pages, especially for junior cert. You'll use a few more for leaving cert. We're just going to have a look at the ones that we do use. So from page 8, the only one we'll use, I'll just mark it here, is the circle down here. Okay, so now you have the length of the circle. What is that? That's the bit all around the edge. So the distance or the circumference around the edge. And you also have your area of a circle. So length is 2 pi r, and so that's your circumference around the edge, and you have your area being pi r squared. So that formula is given to you there. Then moving on to page 10, you have the area of a cylinder. Now, just be very careful. That is just the curved area around the edge, okay? If you have a cylinder that has a top on it, for example, this circle here, if that's a solid top, you need to add on, if you're looking for the area of the circle, which you would get then from the previous page here, being 2 pi r. Okay, moving down then, we have the cone and we have a sphere which comes up. So 4 pi r squared is your volume of a sphere, or your area of a sphere, sorry, and 4 over 3 pi r cubed is your volume of a sphere. Now, a lot of the time the questions, they might have a hemisphere, for example. Your volume of a hemisphere is not there. So if you were asked to find the volume of a hemisphere, first you'd pretend that it's a sphere and then divide by 2. Okay, kind of similar if you were asked for the area of a sphere. Okay, very quick sketch here. So if you're asked for the area of this sphere here, or this hemisphere even, okay, and if it's solid, it means it will have a surface there along the middle, okay. Then you would have to add on the area of a circle as well. So this area down here, you'd get using 4 pi r squared. Now you're going to have to divide it on 2 because it's only a hemisphere, only half a sphere. So pretend it's a sphere and divide it by 2. If it is solid, so if there is a closed top here, you'll need to add on your area of a circle, which is pi r squared. Got that formula from back here. Okay, so just volume and area of a sphere is there, a hemisphere, just basically divide them by 2. Okay, moving on then to our coordinate geometry. So coordinate geometry formulas are on page 18. You have your slope, your length. Now, a lot of the time people just forget this. So your symbol for length is actually given to you here. So if you ever are asked to find this, that means the length from A to B. Another word for length is distance. So if the question ever says anything about distance, that's the same thing as length. Okay? Or if you see this symbol here with the 2 lines down the side. You have your midpoint then, and you have your equation of the line. Now you'll notice there's 2 formulas here for the equation of a line. If you are asked to find the equation of a line, use this one. Okay, to use that then you will need the slope and a point on the line. Okay, again, we have videos explaining all this on YouTube, but just this kind of a general recap. That's the one to use if you were asked to find the equation of the line. If you were given an equation of a line and you want to find the slope, this is how you do it then. Get y on its own. The slope will be the number in front of the x. Okay, those 2 formulas down at the bottom there we don't use for junior cert maths. Then moving on to indices. Okay, so you have your laws of indices here. To be honest, they all come up. The most common ones are probably one of these guys here. Okay, this one here also comes up a bit. Okay, to be honest, they all come up, but the top 3 there are definitely your most common. Okay, one that you need to learn, so it's kind of linked to this, but not really. So if, for example, if it's the cubed root of, I don't know, 10. Okay, we can follow this rule. That will equal 10 to the power of 1/3. Okay, but unfortunately, if you're just given the square root of, we're going to say 25. Okay, you know the answer is 5, but if you need to write that in indice form, that's the same as 25 to the power of 1/2. Okay, so you need to learn off, if there's a square root without a number on it, you can actually put a little 2 there. Okay, and it'll become to the power of 1/2. You need to know that one off. The rest of them you should be able to figure out from the rules. Okay, so if you have a square root, put a little 2 kind of sitting on the tail, and then you can change it to the power of 1/2. Okay, moving on then to our patterns, our sequences and series. This formula here is used to find the general term of a linear sequence. Okay, they tell you on the right there, the first term is A and D is the common difference. Now, some schools you may have been taught a different way to find it and you may not use that. Okay, there is another way to find the general term of a linear sequence or a linear pattern. But if you use that, it is on page 22. Okay, then moving on to financial maths. So anytime it says compound, so compounded annually. So if you have, you're taking out a loan where the interest is compounded annually, your formula is F is equal to P, 1 plus I to the power of T. Or if it's a depreciation question, it's the second one that's highlighted there, it's 1 minus I to the power of T. It's important there, I has to be a decimal. Okay, they'll probably give it to you as a percentage. You need to change it to a decimal. Okay, and then finally, probably the most commonly used one is your minus b formula. This is actually printed on the cover of your formula book as well, so you don't actually have to open it. But anytime you have x squared, x and a number, you use the minus b formula. Okay, just make sure you practice putting it into your calculator as well, because that is a very common mistake for the minus b formula. Now, page 16 then is your trigonometry. Now, these formulas, sine, cos and tan, they're given to you here, but they're kind of given in a weird way. That's why I have them scribbled out. And I learned the rhyme SOHCAHTOA, and then I'm able to know, okay, sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cos is adjacent over hypotenuse, tan is opposite over adjacent. I don't use these here because they're more difficult to use. So most schools anyway learn off a rhyme, whatever rhyme you've learned off. Okay, but Pythagoras' theorem is there. It's on the bottom there of page 16. The only important thing is that C has to be the hypotenuse. So that's what you need to remember about using that. Okay, now, so that's a huge amount of formulas for Junior Cert Maths that is in your formula book that you don't need to learn, which is great. Unfortunately, there are a few that you do need to learn. So I think I have most of them here. So from coordinate geometry, you can find the slope using the slope formula that is given to you, which we saw a second ago. There's also another way to find it, that slope is equal to rise over run. That's useful if you are getting the slope from a graph, but unfortunately you do need to learn that off by heart. Then you have your financial maths formulas. Okay, so if you want to take a screenshot of this, pause and just take a screenshot just to see. So like how to find, if you're asked to find your gross tax, you need to know your formulas. You need to be able to find standard tax and higher tax. Also what your tax credit is, etc. Okay. Most people, when they practice questions, they actually kind of stop learning these and they start to understand them, and you just know what to do with the numbers, but you do need to be able to kind of come up with these formulas to know what to do with the numbers. Okay, so if you practice enough questions, you're going to kind of learn them without, I guess, having to sit down to learn them off by heart, but they are not given to you. Okay, then just a few area and volume ones that aren't given. So area of a rectangle is length by width. Area of a square is length by length, because they're the same thing, or you can write that as L squared. Volume of a cube is length by length by length, because they're all the same thing, or L cubed. Volume of a cuboid is length by width by height, or sometimes people say length by breadth by height. Volume of a prism then is the area of the base. Now, the base of a prism is the triangle side. Okay, so that's your base there. To find the area of a triangle, it's half times the base times the height. Okay, so if I was to do the area of this triangle here, I would have to find that height going straight up there. That's my height and that's my base. Okay, and then of course you multiply that by the length of the prism. Okay, a difficult one to use, so worth spending a bit of time on. And then the last thing then that I'm kind of highlighting that you need to learn is your distance, speed, time triangle. Okay, so how I remember this, Dad's silly triangle. Okay, once you learn the triangle, then you can come up with the formulas. So if I'm asked to find distance, cover distance, distance is equal to speed multiplied by time. If I'm looking for speed, cover speed, speed is distance divided by time. Okay, so once you know how to use the triangle, just learn that triangle and then you'll be able to figure out all the formulas. That is also important for junior cycle science. So distance, speed, time comes up in that as well. So if you learn it for maths, then you'll have learned it for science as well, which is great. Okay, now using your calculator. So people often take this for granted. Just make sure you know how to use your calculator. So it can do really important things. So for example, for functions, if you're asked to plot a function, you can use the table function to find the points. Okay, for getting your answer from the minus b formula as well, it's also really handy. Just make sure you practice putting it into your calculator. And then just in general, which people often do, if you are substituting a negative number into something, just put in a bracket. Okay, put everything in a bracket. As long as all your brackets have friends, so all your brackets are closed, your calculator likes brackets. Okay, so always kind of use brackets, especially with negative numbers. Okay, and we'll finish here with just some general tips and advice. So know what formulas are in your formula book and which you need to learn. Okay, there's nothing more frustrating if you're spending a couple of minutes flicking through the formula book thinking a formula is there when in fact it's one that you needed to learn. Second thing, know how to use your calculator. Make sure between now and your exams, if you buy a new calculator, that you buy the same calculator. Buttons are in a slightly different position. So just you don't want to be trying to figure that out on the day of your exam. When you're reading questions, highlight keywords and write down any formula you think might be relevant. Okay, so if you're not sure, write down something. Okay, they can't give you a 10 marks if you leave it blank. Whereas if you write down something, so if you think, okay, this question, it might be asking me something about the slope of a line, write down the formula, try and fill points into it. Okay, draw diagrams. This is particularly important for trigonometry and geometry. If you're unsure, draw a diagram, it might help to visualize it. Keep your work neat and organised. And in general, I always say this, if your answer is coming out really, really long, you've probably made a mistake. Okay, so use the size of the boxes to judge it a little bit. But if you find that you are doing a question and there is 20 lines to your method, the chances are you have made some mistake, okay? That you have misread the question and that you are overcomplicating it, okay? Very few questions on your exam will be that long or that difficult. Okay, so maybe if you are finding something too long, just go back, take a pause, think, okay, what other method could I use? Okay, other than that, I just want to wish everyone the best of luck in June. Try your best. Remember, you've done loads of hard work for the last 3 years, and all of that will hopefully pay off in your exam. So thanks everybody, and best of luck in June.